The market signal everyone misread. At the time, it looked unmistakable, clear, consistent, almost reassuring. And that clarity is what made it dangerous. To understand why this story matters today, we need to examine how markets communicate, not through headlines or opinions, but through signals, prices, spreads, flows, volatility. These are not messages with intent. They are reflections of behavior, and reflections can be deceptive when the environment changes. For years, one particular signal gained authority. It appeared repeatedly during calm periods and resolved exactly as expected. When it flashed, markets stabilized. When it faded, confidence returned. Traders learned to trust it. Models elevated it. Risk frameworks incorporated it as a meaningful guide. This signal didn't promise profits. It promised reassurance, a sense that stress was temporary, that dislocations would correct, that intervention, liquidity, or mean reversion would arrive on time. It became shorthand for safety, a signal that said, quietly, nothing to worry about. As markets grew more complex, this signal became even more valuable. With so much information competing for attention, investors needed anchors, something objective, something visible. This signal appeared to offer exactly that. It simplified uncertainty into a recognizable pattern. Over time, behavior adjusted around it. When the signal appeared, positions were held, risk was tolerated, volatility was discounted. The market learned to pause instead of react. And because outcomes repeatedly justified that patience, belief hardened. What went unnoticed was how much the signal itself depended on structure. It worked in an environment shaped by policy support, abundant liquidity, and synchronized responses. It reflected a world where stress was met quickly and decisively, a world that felt permanent. As a result, the signal stopped being interpreted. It was obeyed. When it appeared, discussion ended. Due diligence narrowed. Scenarios collapsed into expectation. The signal no longer invited analysis. It replaced it. This is how misreading begins. Not through ignorance, but through repetition. When a signal works often enough, it stops being questioned. It becomes a rule. But market signals do not carry guarantees. They are not laws of nature. They are patterns produced by specific conditions. And when those conditions change, the meaning of the signal changes with them. That shift was already underway. It just hadn't been recognized yet, because the signal everyone trusted was about to say something new, and almost no one was listening. The signal began behaving differently long before it was declared broken. It still appeared. It still looked familiar, but its follow-through weakened. Stabilization took longer. Recoveries felt less convincing. These were not failures, just delays. Easy to dismiss, easy to rationalize. Market participants explained the changes using the old framework: temporary frictions, unusual news flow, seasonal effects. The signal had earned trust, and trust is resilient to doubt. When something has worked repeatedly, its imperfections are treated as exceptions. What few noticed was that the environment producing the signal had shifted. Liquidity was no longer abundant by default. Policy responses were slower, more conditional. Market structure had changed, with more passive flows and fewer discretionary stabilizers. The signal was still flashing, but the machinery behind it was different. This mattered because the signal was never predictive on its own. It was descriptive. It reflected how quickly stress was absorbed. When absorption slowed, the signal did not lose meaning. Its meaning inverted. What once indicated resolution now indicated strain. But interpretation lagged reality. Models continued to weight the signal heavily. Risk systems treated it as confirmation. When volatility spiked and the signal appeared, investors assumed relief was coming. They held positions that should have been reduced. They waited when they should have adjusted. This created a dangerous pause, a window where action was delayed not because of uncertainty, but because of confidence. The signal encouraged patience in an environment that demanded responsiveness. As conditions tightened, the signal became more frequent, not less. Stress lingered. The market repeatedly reached for reassurance. Each appearance reinforced the urge to trust history, yet each resolution arrived weaker than the last. This is how misreading compounds. The signal was not lying. It was speaking a new language, But markets were still listening in the old one. By the time participants began questioning the signal, its influence was already embedded in positioning. Decisions had been made. Exposure had been carried forward. The cost of adjustment had grown. The market had not ignored the signal. It had misunderstood it. And misunderstanding, when scaled across millions of decisions, becomes a force of its own. The conflict reached its peak when the signal appeared at exactly the wrong moment. Volatility surged. Spreads widened. Prices moved sharply. And there was again flashing reassurance, just as it always had. This time, the market listened. Positions were held. Risk was tolerated. Adjustments were delayed. The signal suggested patience, and patience had been rewarded for years. But the environment no longer supported that response. Liquidity did not arrive on schedule. Policy support was slower, more ambiguous. Buyers hesitated. What should have been a brief dislocation began to stretch. Losses accumulated not because prices collapsed, but because they failed to recover. As pressure mounted, the signal kept appearing. Stress triggered it repeatedly. Each appearance reinforced a belief that relief was imminent, and with every delay, exposure grew heavier. The market was trapped between expectation and reality. This is where the signal did the most damage, not by misleading once, but by misleading consistently. It encouraged the same response at a moment when the correct response had changed. The signal was no longer a guide. It was an echo. When participants finally acted, the adjustment was abrupt. Positions were cut into thinning liquidity. Volatility spiked further. The signal disappeared not because conditions improved, but because confidence had broken. In hindsight, the conflict was never about the signal itself. It was about interpretation. The market had outsourced judgment to a pattern that no longer described the system it was observing. Signals do not fail suddenly. They decay. Their reliability erodes as structure changes. But because decay is gradual, it is easy to miss, especially when past success is still fresh. By the time the market recognized a misreading, the cost of correction had multiplied. The signal had delayed action precisely when speed mattered most. The buildup was complete. What once reduced uncertainty had become a source of it, and the market was about to learn what the signal really meant now. The resolution did not come from the signal changing. It came from a market changing its response. Once participants accepted that reassurance was no longer guaranteed, behavior shifted quickly. Exposure was reduced. Positions were resized. Patience gave way to protection. Only then did the meaning of the signal become clear. It had not been forecasting relief. It had been measuring strain. Each appearance was not a promise of recovery, but a record of how much pressure the system was under. The signal was warning, not comforting. In hindsight, the misreading feels obvious. Signals are only as reliable as the structure that produces them. When liquidity, policy, and market participation change, signals change with them. Patterns do not carry memory. Markets do. This story matters because modern investing depends heavily on signals. Dashboards, indicators, alerts. They simplify complexity and enable speed. But simplification comes with risk. When interpretation lags structure, signals can delay the very actions they were meant to support. The lesson is not to abandon signals. It is to question what they are actually measuring now, not what they measured before, not what they used to mean, but what conditions make them appear and what those conditions imply today. Markets rarely fail because information is absent. They struggle when information is misread with confidence, when patterns are trusted beyond their context, when history is mistaken for permanence. The signal was never wrong. The assumption behind it was. So, what do you think? Are we still trusting market signals that belong to a system that no longer exists? The market